Good morning and welcome to the Cook County Board of Commissioners regular meeting for July 19th, 2016. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, goodness. All right, any adjustments to the agenda?
Madam Chair, when we get to 7A, I would just like to make an explanatory comment.
Okie dokie. Any other additions or subtractions? Commissioner Gamble?
Motion to approve the agenda as stated.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Any opposition? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, public comment. Would anybody in the public like to comment? They're running to the stand now. Let's hold on. Okay, never mind. Good morning. All right, moving on to the consent agenda, items to be pulled. Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pull item D and item F.
Okay, anything else to be pulled? With that, can I get a motion to approve A, B, C, and E?
Support. A second.
Okay, so we have Storley and Severson. Any opposition? Any discussion? All in favor? Commissioner Gamble, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just pulled these, the special event permit. We have a number of special event permits that come before us, and I had an individual ask who approves special event permits, and I said the county board does, and they usually come through the county engineer, sheriff's department. And the point that was being made was that, especially with new events, now Fisherman's Picnic is an event that has been long-standing here, so we have worked through a lot of the things that have set this permit in place. The 99er and some of the other events that are recent that we've had that affect traffic flow is the issue that was brought up. And I would just encourage that on these new events, I know that the event planners do an excellent job. They try to anticipate, they talk to all the people involved, and it would be good just to know when they assess after an event how the experience was, if we can improve on it. And I think the concern was that just traffic flow. And we all know if we've gone through Duluth when it's Grandma's Marathon, that you try to stay away just because you know it's going to be crazy. And so I think trying to find the balance between creating opportunity up here, using our resources, and just being aware of how we can best make it not an inconvenience for people is my point for pulling this, and just saying it'd be nice to know what our assessment is after these events and how we might be able to improve them.
Jeff, can you check with the sheriff and the highway engineer about if we do any type of recap or eval on it?
Yep, I can ask them.
Okay, I know that they both look at applications. The Fisherman's Picnic is 85 years, or hopefully close to that. And I know that even though it's a reoccurring application, they take it very seriously and look at it really closely. So, but that is a good question, so Jeff will follow up on that.
Yeah, I think the Grand or whatever that we just had, that was the very first time we did that. 99ers is a new event, and I think it's just looking at it and saying, what can we learn from this experience? Anything to find that balance between creating opportunity and mitigating inconvenience. So
I'm just wondering with the Grand du Nord, I now see a plethora of bicyclists all over the Upper Gunflint Trail, which I have not seen before, so I'm wondering if that brought people up there or not.
And the other comment that was made in that regard is that some of these races, and Jeff might know this, that if they publish the route, people come up in advance of the event to get a feel for it, which creates traffic. And some will not do that. They'll say start and end point just because they don't want people running the course, which adds to that congestion.
It depends on the type of an event. A gravel grinder typically is a blind course,
Yeah.
and you don't know it beforehand. That's part of that activity. Whereas the 99er is a published course.
Yeah.
And item F?
And then with item F, I just wanted, and Brady might be able to answer this question, do we generally go out for bids on these when we're, asking vendors to provide us, both the hardware and the contract relative to our cost per?
They're small enough not to be required. IT does this now. Kevin actually does this for the last 4 or 5 years. But I think he just does a survey out there. I'm not sure that I don't think he does any formal bidding, but he checks everywhere.
Yeah, I guess the formal bid, while not a requirement, the fact that we're just doing our due
Yeah.
diligence and finding out where the marketplace is.
I think they're pretty good about providing pricing on all this kind of stuff, so you can go find it.
You can do
You
that,
want to.
yeah. Knowing Kevin, I'm sure he's thorough on it. All right, thank you, I appreciate the discussion. Madam Chair, I'd make a motion to approve items D and F.
Can I get a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Severson, any further discussion? Any opposition? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Commissioner Gamble. Okay, Jeff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assessor Search Committee, we talked at the last meeting about a process for filling vacancies at the director, at the department head level. And I'm asking that the board approve the search committee for the next county assessor of myself, Judy Hill, Tim Nelson, and Commissioner Gamble.
Okay, we'll start with discussion. Commissioner Severson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item sounds like a good one to me.
Commissioner Gamble?
No comment?
Commissioner Storley?
Thank you, sounds good. Thank you for doing that.
Can I get a motion, please?
I will make a motion to approve the search committee for the next county assessor comprised of Jeff Cadwell, Judy Hill, Tim Nelson, and Gary Ginn.
I will second that. Any further discussion? Any opposition? All in favor?
Aye.
Item B, I think we've had a conversation about the inability to fill our assistant county engineer position, the vacancy that we've had for 2 years or more. And in looking at the wage range, we thought that that was really one of the obstacles in recruiting somebody to come up here who has a PE degree, who has 4 years of experience, who can come in and have an impact and alleviate some of the workload on our county engineer. We had conversations about bringing someone in who required some training, and then that conversation led to the fact that that's actually creating more work for our county engineer. Dave is not here today because of where they are, but he and I have had this conversation, taken a look at this. We've redrawn some of the responsibilities in the engineer and the assistant engineer proposal, and the way that that ends up coming up is I only copied the front half. Anyway, one of the items that we transferred to the assistant county engineer from the county engineer was the management of the community groups and being the point of contact for all of that, and the latitude of all of that and the supervision of those resources. And that was the item that led to my thought of the classification of being a D instead of a C. And so it's a very small portion of the job is classified up to D, which is why it's a D6-1. But it solves the problem of the market being in the way of us getting somebody that we need. It's not inconsistent. We have the assistant county attorney is also classified as a D6 level. So I would just take questions. I see this as our only opportunity to fill that position as it exists with a few modifications to the job description And we'd like to go forward and begin a new search with this new classification and wage range.
Okay, discussion, Commissioner Storley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And where do you advertise? How far outreaching is this?
Well, it's probably, I think we've reached out through Duluth, but the Twin Cities, we've gone through the professional associations in the state of Minnesota. I think we can extend that reach into Wisconsin. Our last engineering tech came from Wisconsin. So I think that that's really the limit of the range that we're gonna draw from for this position.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff, when we've looked at this in the Personnel Committee previously, and we were concerned about consistency. You reference, the assistant attorney, and so I think that consistency is hugely important. We're going through a change with our comp study, and so this is all going to be looked at again. I
Yep.
think it's just the mindfulness of where we position this, and other department heads just had concerns that we weren't, bending our analysis in order to fit it. And so I appreciate, looking at that consistency, and we're aware of the problem we've had in filling it, and we're mindful of the fact that this can change as we go to a different classification system. But
That's a very good point. We're not doing this simply because we haven't been able to find somebody. We've looked at it, we've reevaluated it. If you look at the credentials and the education and the experience that's required, this position is very comparable to the assistant county attorney position.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's inconsistent at all. It sets a bar pretty high, but hopefully the additional wage structure in this, again, so that if we put this in place, we reevaluate it, and it looks different, in a few months. So, but I think it is consistent with the expectations of the new description.
And I appreciate the mindfulness that as we've shifted from the Personnel Committee evaluating this to having, you and those involved looking at these assessments when they come before the board now. And when we have representation on the Personnel Committee where there are concerns from other department heads, those concerns haven't been lost in the change in process. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Severson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this makes sense to me, particularly in view of this conversation. But also, it's just because it's been vacant for a long time, it needed to be looked at and changed. And I appreciate the changes that have been made. They make sense to me. So I would make the motion to approve the reclassification of the assistant engineer position from C5-2 to D61-2.
Support.
Any further discussion? Any opposition? All in favor?
Aye.
Jeff, if you don't mind, we'll move to Tim and come back to you.
That's fine.
Thanks for coming in early tonight.
Thank you and good morning. We have before you kind of the culmination of the update of the sign ordinance. This has been a process that has been in place for actually many years now. We started the process at about the time that MnDOT came to us and we took a look at Highway 61 with regards to that being a scenic byway, and the board at that time passed a resolution prohibiting all new billboards along 61, and at that point we decided to go ahead and take a look at the overall sign ordinance and all the provisions. It's been in the works for a while, as I mentioned. I approached the board last month about the committee work that had been completed on that, and we had also had it reviewed by an attorney with regards to a Supreme Court case decision that had been recently made with regards to speech and the provision or regulation of signs. So we did have that reviewed for us, and we did go out on public hearing. The public hearing was held last week, and we'd actually, since we had done so much prep work and we as I had discussed at last month's meeting, had approached Lutzen Township, who had separate or different and distinct regulations for signs in the boundaries of the township. One of the goals of changing these provisions was to make it consistent throughout the county, not to have separate provisions in one township and then other provisions elsewhere. So the provisions and the work that we had done was reviewed by Lutzen, and they went ahead and just voluntarily said, well, we'll just go ahead and relinquish their standards because ours were lining up close enough with that. That was good. I had sent a copy also to the Chamber of Commerce to take a look at, since these are predominantly, they're not really, regular residents that are using these. These are all businesses and such. And so once we had completed the work and Lutzen Township was finished with looking at it, it sent it to the Chamber and had received no comments back from them at all. They're presuming then that they are satisfied with the work that was done. By and large, a lot of the work is basically clarifying language, writing it in a more understandable language. And most of the provisions, if they have changed, have actually become less restrictive than the previous version of this. At the public hearing, there were no members of the public that showed up to comment on it. Then the discussion was pretty much involved around the Planning Commission and the staff that was there at the time. There were a few recommended changes that were made. Unfortunately, in the copy that you got, the markup is a little bit more difficult to read in the fact that it was strikeout in black lettering, and then the new language or recommended language was red without any underline, so it's a little different from what it normally was. Joseph Ruth, one of our staff members who's put in a tremendous amount of time in this whole process, was wrestling a little bit between the versions of Word and the correct stuff, so he did the best he can in terms of putting that in. I actually changed the copy for myself to make it a little bit more easier to read. So I'll just touch on a few of the issues. Most of these changes that were recommended from the Planning Commission were ones to make it just a little bit more easy to read, a little simplistic, little clarifications. If you look on page 8, under the general regulations applicable to all signs, in section 4.4 and in 4.5, the changes are made. They're just difficult to enforce. Some of these provisions in here, looking, around the area of the signs, need to be sanitary and inoffensive and free of obnoxious substances. Some of that language is just very difficult to enforce and get on. And also in the next provision in section 4.05, there had, and this was a provision that had been in from the very beginning of the sign regulations, that a conditional use permit would be issued for an internally illuminated sign only when it is determined that other permitted signs will not accomplish the advertising purpose, the burden of proof being the responsibility of the applicant. Now that's a really tough one to call, very subjective in nature, and how do you prove almost a negative that, no, that's not going to work, so we need this. So that was recommended to be struck altogether. On page 9, again in section 4.06, it's just rewriting it for better clarification. Page 10, section 5, the county attorney helped with the state requirements for the campaign signs. That's in state statute, so we just basically mirror what's there. A couple other tweaks below that in terms of window signs, that's already defined in the definitions and such. And that's out pretty much it as far as the recommended changes go from the work that had been completed. So the Planning Commission went ahead and passed it out on a unanimous vote, recommending approval of the sign ordinance update with the recommended changes.
You went from 58 pages to 19 pages?
We do what we can.
And then the other thing,
Applause.
the other thing for this board to be aware of, the changes that the Planning Commission made, in the language was because they are the body that is required to understand it, and so it was all clarifying for them to be able to enforce it. It wasn't anything that went against the work of the sign committee, it was just so that they understood it themselves when they have to regulate. So, we will start with discussion. Commissioner Severson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so it sounds like a very successful process. To go from 58 pages to 19 is no easy feat. And also, I really appreciate that you submitted it to the chamber. That was kind of my issue, reading it and wondering, I had a bunch of why this, why that. But if the body of the chamber has had a chance to look at this and there are no comments, I'm just thinking, and also that nobody showed up really for the public hearing, I'm thinking people must be fine with it. And I'm not gonna argue with that. So, and I think there were a number of good changes. And I won't go into those because, yeah. So, but I do have a couple questions. So to become, because most of this is less restrictive than it was before, but the resort commercial is more restrictive. Did that come out of those folks? Did they want their signage to be more restrictive? Were there issues around going from 500 to 300 square feet, for instance? And now there's an IUP required for over 300. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Severson, most of the detailed numbers we spent a lot of time doing a physical inventory of what actually was being used.
Got it.
Went out, took pictures, took measurements. Joseph did all the field work in going out and really determined what actually was being used out there in comparison to what the provisions were. There were a lot of kind of ambiguous requirements in terms of what size of the backdrop, what was really included in this and that. And so that number was derived as basically a compromise of reflecting what actually existed out there and how well it was working.
Great, that seems like a great, yeah, look at what is and build it around what is and what is working. That seems really great.
The planning commission also discussed that in detail, just to make sure that they weren't being too restrictive.
Yeah,
And
but
I
I mean.
thought it was fair, because you can still get
Yeah.
a larger sign, you just have to come in and apply.
Yeah, good point. So you can have control over the largest, and if that's what's out there and that's what's working in this climate, it makes sense that you would just make it around that. And then I just had a couple, subjective kinds of questions, the illuminated prohibitive, or moving signs. And I'm sure that, that is a matter of taste, and this doesn't involve the commercial district of Grand Marais, so it really isn't, I don't have an issue with that. And the fluorescent colors, I always get a kick out of that one. It's like, what are fluorescent colors?
We had that discussion also.
Yeah.
Stan is now driving a
Okay, so-
fluorescent vehicle, so that will help.
So that would be a good question. Are those fluorescent colors?
Are we fluorescent?
Do we have?
We did do that with the planning commission, who was wearing what and what would be considered fluorescent.
Yeah.
We decided my hair would be a good example of fluorescent.
So if I was just to make one move in this whole thing, I would just take that out, because I don't even know if anybody even knows what a fluorescent color is anymore. But I'm not gonna go there, so I'm good.
Molly pulled up the description.
Okay, is it like a special kind of paint, like a metallic, or?
Fluorescing.
It's fluorescence.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's such a thing. It's a
There is
fluorescent.
such a thing.
Does it
That's
glow
why
in
we
the
left
dark?
it in. No, that's a
Okay.
different term.
Okay, all right, thanks. That ends my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Severson. Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did she cover it all for you?
I don't know, I hit the fluorescent thing, then I went. I mean, in the printing industry, you can get your metallic inks, you can get your regular, they refer to it as PMS, which is the Pantone matching syrup, and then you can get your fluorescent, and so you definitely have, on your palette, you've got,
Distinctions. You can prove it.
distinctions, so you
Okay.
can say, this is from that category. But I would say that the, having sat on the sign ordinance committee with Commissioner Storley and former Commissioner Bruce Martinson, there was considerable discussion and we looked at a number of different things. Our intent initially, and I think it's identified well in the request that's coming before the board, drafting an update to the sign ordinance, taking into consideration new types of technologies associated with illuminating signs, as well as Supreme Court decision that affected county's ability to regulate various types of speech. When I first became a commissioner, I think there was a request that came before us, and it had to do with LED. And I had a broader understanding, signs that are illuminated. If it has lights, then there's various types of lighting that you can do, interior, exterior, LED lighting, whatever it might be. And so it became obvious to me that a lot of ordinance or language that is subjective in nature makes people nervous. But the more specific that you can be without it elongating or adding to, the amount of verbiage you have to read in order to understand what's what. And I think as we went through as a committee that we found out, if you have to go here, check back here, whatever, and then pull it all together in order to know what to do, it gets a bit convoluted. So there was a look from an organizational standpoint, from more of an intuitive standpoint, as well as changes that we would address that would make our sign ordinance up to date. The other thing I think that is an important statement to make is that, and I appreciated the handout too, that just lets people know what did we change. I think the intent of the committee was to make sure that we brought our ordinance up to date, and that it was easier referenced in layman terminologies, and that we didn't make it so convoluted so you'd have to go all over the place to find out what you're doing. And so in the handout that Tim provided, it says design standards for all signs has been changed to be less restrictive than the current ordinance. So our intention certainly wasn't to be more restrictive, and when questions came up, we'd ask Joseph, well, what are we doing right now? And that's where he would go out and he'd come back and we'd look at it and we'd draw pictures on boards and whatever else, and we'd say, hey, if this is what people are doing, then it seems to make sense, as well as having a comparison with what's happening elsewhere in previous experience that Tim or others had had. And then another component to that was the fluorescent component, which I lost another component other than the fact that we, given the nature of being a pristine wilderness and a tourist community and an eclectic artistic community, we want to allow opportunity for all of those things and still be mindful of how we protect, the aesthetic of our environment. So I appreciate to be part of the committee, and I appreciated the diligence that was invested in the people that participated in making sure that we protected all those elements. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Storley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, being a past business owner, it brought back my ideas of, okay, this is a sign that I need to advertise so folks know where to find us. And so in serving on this committee, it helped to understand, the sources of how business people advertise going up the Gunflint Trail, up the Caribou Trail, and so forth. And I think we did a really good, thorough investigation of how things have been done, and then how we want to be less restrictive for opportunities to come. And one of the things that I keep thinking about is when we now have our GPS and our iPhones and all that, we can just figure out 5 miles ahead where we can eat or where we can stay. So I'm wondering if someday billboards and that type of thing will be obsolete, because now we'll know when we travel where these things are. Maybe not within a city, but definitely out there. And especially when you're around Hinckley, I would hope that some of those signs would be removed with our modern technology. But I enjoyed working on the committee with everybody and glad that we could bring it up to date and no one had any objections to it, so you're good to go here. And this is available online, or will be available online?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioner Story. It will be, if the board decides to go ahead and accept and adopt the update, it will be published in the newspaper, and without reference to a specific effective date, the effective date would be the published date. And so it would be published in the paper and also available on the website, yes.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Can I get a motion to adopt, Commissioner Gamble?
Motion to accept the recommendation of the Planning Commission to adopt the proposed Cook County sign ordinance number 53 as presented.
Commissioner Severson seconds. Any further discussion? Any opposition? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Tim.
Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank Joseph, please.
Yes.
Good job, you guys.
All right, Jeff, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator update, I just have a couple of things that are listed and one thing that isn't listed. Classification compensation study, we have consultants in-house today through Friday, doing interviews with 72 of our staff. We're doing 72 interviews over the course of the next 4 days. And a lot of work has gone into reviewing job descriptions. A lot of work is going to be going into making sure that we capture all the essential elements of all of these positions and the nature of the work that all of our staff are doing. And then after that, there's going to be a lot of synthesizing of job descriptions to try to make as much consistency as we can so that it'll be clear that we're pulling out all of the essential requirements, that we're capturing all of the licensures and accreditations that are required for each of the position, that basically we have consistency from department to department and job to job to make sure that it'd be clearly identifiable as a Cook County job, and it'll also be clearly defined so that if somebody wanted to know what this job does, they could pick up the description and have a very good idea. So that's part of the work to be done with the class count study. Another component that we met briefly at the Personnel Committee is we talked about our compensation strategy, the basis for making decisions. And this is something that we're going to gather with the Personnel Committee meeting again here at the end of the month, and a decision that we'll have to make. We're gathering data with the job evaluations, with the interviews. At some point, we're going to have to address the philosophy behind what we want to do. And four of the questions that we're going to answer, and we had a first go-round with the Personnel Committee, and we're going to have a second go-round with the Personnel Committee again. Compensation strategy is basically broken down into 4 questions. Who do we compete with in the marketplace? Define the market. Where we position our program relative to the competition. Are we going to be median? Are we going to be 95%? Are we going to be 105% of median? What do we want to pay for? Seniority, performance, other factors. And then the 4th one, how do we deliver pay? Step progression, merit increases, COLA adjustments. Lots of moving pieces in here. This compensation strategy eventually will be something that the whole board will have to adopt. It's something that we're having conversations with, as I mentioned, in the Personnel Committee. It's something that we'll have to adopt, because once we take all the data and then we have to define what kind of a matrix we want to use for compensation, and we have to address where we want to be within the marketplace. The rest is a calculation. So the strategy has components about market, it has components about values. Commissioner Gamble, are there other things that in that conversation that I'm forgetting?
Well, I would say a component we haven't, spent a lot of time discussing, but it's in positioning ourselves. It's when we've looked at this and had discussions in previous board discussions on this, we've talked about whether or not we want to attract by positioning ourselves high and then having a lower acceleration as to compensation increases. And whatever strategy drove Cook County previously, it was positioning ourselves more in the median position and then having more opportunity for growth. So the component that I would add to it is just understanding the marketplace relative to psychographics as to where people are when they're looking for positions. And sometimes the models or the strategies we've used in the past don't fit that present psychographic, and I think that's one of the components that will influence our decision.
Certainly something
What
we'll
people
consider.
care about, yeah.
So anyway, that work is ongoing. Staffing, currently we have, the deadline has passed for the YMCA custodian position, so we'll be having interviews coming up relating to that position. The soil and water seasonal tech position, I believe that deadline has passed. We heard in the Human Services Board meeting this morning that we've set a deadline for, or we're recruiting for that office support case aid position. Deadline for that position is 7/29. Testing will be offered again on August 9th for that position. And then we have the emergency management director and the assessor position vacancies. And the deadline for those two positions is August 15th. So that's, any questions about where we're at on,
How many applicants did we get for the maintenance?
for the YMCA custodian? We got 3 applications.
Okay. As you can see, I'll be on the radio tomorrow. Gotta have something to talk about.
Fluorescent comes to mind.
Oh dear.
Oh,
If that's
it's not psychographic.
Okay.
Yeah. It's psychographic is somebody's painting. Yeah.
The third item that I have is Scenic Byway Grant. The Scenic Byway Committee had been awarded a federal transportation alternatives grant, and we had a meeting with Soil and Water, with state MnDOT representatives, with the Highway Department, and with the Scenic Byway membership. And we came down to the thought that maybe this wasn't the best grant for us, because federal dollars come with a lot of oversight, and oversight is expensive. And the $120,000 grant could require anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 worth of compliance measures, which either we have to come up with additional money or we have to cut back on the scale of the project. Neither one of them seem like good options. Out of that meeting, we determined maybe this isn't the right mechanism, but we also had some commitment from MnDOT people to say, let's look for a better suited source of funding to do this project. And we also had a comment from our Elena Berg about maybe there's another way to go at this completely and not go through transportation funding and use a water source funding. So all I'm saying right now is that we're looking at options to, the grant basically was to eliminate invasive species on a 4-mile stretch of the Gunflint Trail up near the end, and then to replant with native species. And it was to be like a 3-year project with monitoring. And so everybody agrees this is something we want to do. Even from basic highway standpoint, regrowing after construction is a challenge here with the soils that we have in Cook County. So if we can find a more suitable way to do that, that includes native species as opposed to non-native species, everybody wins. So everybody's supporting this. It's just a matter of finding the right funding mechanism so that we have due diligence, but not onerous oversight requirements. So we're doing some work in the background. I just want people to know that we're working on it, and we want to, I'll be meeting with Elena probably later this week to see what we can do. And if we have an opportunity coming up quickly, we may be talking about this again next week.
No, we won't be here next week.
Yeah, we are.
Yes, we will.
Frank will be there.
Oh yeah, it's only the 19th.
It's only the 19th. We got one more this month.
It was a big day.
You just
Want some
ruined
more
my
brownie?
day. Yeah, one more brownie. Any other
Um,
questions for Jeff?
Any questions about that? Yeah.
Just a comment, I appreciate the wisdom in that, stepping back and looking at, here's the carrot, but what's it tied to? And that oftentimes we don't do because we are so in need of funding that oftentimes we'll just take the funding and then find out what we've committed ourselves to. I appreciate that discipline.
huge thank you to our soil and water team for taking a look at it, being willing to step back from this and finding another way
Yeah.
to get to it, because it's important.
And the last item that I have, Madam Chair, is the courthouse art program. The end of this week, we'll be taking down the first display, and the second display will be up by the end of next week.
Great.
It's a good thing we have a meeting next week so we can see it.
Right.
No, it won't be up until the 29th,
Oh.
the end of next week.
So we'll never see.
They have another reason. I'm bringing snacks.
All right.
That is all, thank you.
Okay, we will move on to employee commissioner concerns, commissioner reports, meeting to note, meeting updates. Commissioner Severson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to report on going to the Forest Service public hearing last week in Duluth, just to say that it was very well attended. It was a very well-run meeting. The process was obviously very thoughtful in order to generate peace and harmony with very, not necessarily very opposing ideas, but very emotional connections to either or, the permitting or not permitting. And I would just say the process was very well done. Everybody spoke from their heart, and it was, I'm really glad I went. It helped me feel for all of the parts of the puzzle. And it's not a no-brainer, but it's a serious issue, and I think I saw it as we were all on the same side, really. It's just how do we solve the economic issues? So I thought it was a great meeting, and I think the next public hearing is tonight or tomorrow night?
It's tonight in Ely, I think at 5
Tonight in
o'clock.
Ely, At 5 o'clock at the high school? Anyway, yeah.
But Ely, it's not too hard to find.
Ely's
Once
well.
you're there.
Once you're there, it's
I
not
mean,
too
once
far.
you're there.
Yeah, once you find Ely, you can find where the meeting is, go where all the cars are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we owe a big thank you to Brian Silence, and if you all saw the front of the paper, we had a little issue at the YMCA that was an expensive issue with the water, and so thank you to the PUC committee for letting them off a little bit on that, which is common practice on a first offense. WTIP covered it, and so take a look at the paper. That was very helpful for us since we're part of the funders with them, and it's nice to know that we are all working towards the same goal. And then I was at the soil and water meeting at the beginning of the month, and we talked about the scenic byway. Another thing we talked about with their staffing changes and turnover is we had money that came in for aquatic invasive species. They willingly and very nicely created the document that we needed to receive that funding, and then somehow all of the responsibility fell on that office. It's not really their responsibility, and we have a committee, an AIS committee, so at some point, we as a board need to have a discussion. Who oversees that program? Does the committee? Who has the responsibility? They have contract labor that needs to be signed off and paid, and who sees the oversight? And it's kind of confusing as to whether or not that department should hold the responsibility of signing off on someone's pay stub that's not their employee. So that's a discussion that Jeff will get on the schedule for us. I know, since it's not a problem and it's working, why are we talking about it, but.
Madam
at
Chair,
some
we
point-
we have been discussing an option to find a permanent place for that to land, and you will see something coming up soon on a better way to organize that, I think.
Good.
And Madam Chair, yesterday was the Water Advisory Committee, and Stan, who's sitting in the audience, does an AIS update for us, so some of those, issues and what we find effective, and the daunting nature of just trying to be able to stem some of that. We had considerable discussion. He does a good job of keeping us posted on it, but that's part of the discussion we had yesterday was with monies that we have in that. We've looked at, in the One Watershed, One Plan, we went through that process, and as we got towards the end, it got hung up because Bowser wanted to know, how are you going to measure this? How are you going to find out whether you're effective? And I think that's part of our discussion yesterday with AIS is, we have these monies, how are we investing them, but how will we be able to measure our effectiveness? And so some of the discussion was, where does the information come back to say, this is what we've done, and certainly that's another component of it, but this is relatively new, you know, with that funding mechanism that put this in place, but appreciate those that are participating in it.
Well, Dave Seaton did a presentation at the Mid-Trail homeowners, and I learned a lot in his presentation. So whatever you're doing, however you're getting it out there, that was effective. There was almost 40 people there.
Well, our most effective weapon is yet to be released, and that's Stan's recommendation that we have a little snow globe. And you shake the snow
Spiny water
globe and all the invasives are, yeah.
Shaken up in there.
And they stay shaken up.
The interesting question was, as many of you know, a lot of us that have been born and raised here have no problem dropping our cup into a lake and taking a sip. And someone said, so what does a spiny water flea do to your intestines? And I was like, oh, we'll find that out. All right, any other meeting notes, meeting updates? I'm on the radio tomorrow. I will call in for that. Brady, 1% local option sales tax information.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, if you have your report in front of you, February of 2016, looks a little out of alignment. It's a 45% drop from last year, if you're looking at it. I got an explanation back from the state, and it was due to an audit of the years 2011 through 2014. The audit was completed in February of 2016. It was about $45,000, $45,257. So it was really corrections to people that pay sales tax for the 3-year period of 2011 to 2014, but it all hit in February of 2016. So we have not taken the 45% loss that month.
How rude.
It's actually slightly higher than last year. So,
Thank you, Brady.
but that's how it shows up.
Anyone have any discussion or comments on correspondence? And we do have the Cook County Grand Marais EDA with the city meeting next week that we are going to be here. No, it's in my calendar, it'll tell me to be here. And then we have airport. Brady.
Yeah, Rob was going to try and be here. We may not meet him. As you can see in your packet, RSNH is asking for a change order to increase the amount for the airport extension grading Phase 2 project by $227,158.80. It's for the runway 9 approach, and they have found an obstruction there that needs to be cleared, and it's bedrock, of course. A large body of bedrock. It was not all they test, but they can't test every square inch. The FAA requires this, they need that cleared, so they have by letter, agreed and approved with this analysis and for the change order. So they've approved that amount to be paid from the grant, but it's not an addition. They've not approved any additional monies, and where that makes sense is that the project itself is under budget by more than about $250,000. So this falls within the current funding.
Okay, we'll start with discussion. Commissioner Storley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that's good to know that it falls below, so that.
Yeah, they would be making a request for additional funding if it didn't, but right now there's no need to.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so, I mean, the understanding as to, the additional cost is a result of the clearing. We didn't know exactly what was what until it was cleared, and then we had a better idea.
Yeah, it was a bump, that's what they saw,
Yeah.
but underneath the bump of dirt and grass was a gigantic bedrock.
And the FAA won't let us use it as an obstacle course.
Yeah, they need so much clearance, and that had to go. So.
And so then recognizing that it required this additional $227,000 to be able to correct that, the fact that we were under budget meant that we didn't have to make any further application. However, it had to meet the criteria that it was the reasonableness of the cost.
Yes.
Yeah. So this basically is informational, and it doesn't affect the budget
No.
theoretically, and it falls within line of the projections that were made initially as to cost to be able to do this work.
Yeah, if there were any overrun that happened to, from here on occur, and this was part of it, we would make application again, and likely they would approve it, but it would take process.
Right, yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Severson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in favor of this and ready to make a motion, but I did want to ask about the $227,158.80. That's so interesting that it can come down to a penny. That's kind of a fascinating idea when you're
Well-
talking that kind of money.
I like when we get to
I
pennies.
bet.
Yeah.
In favor of that. That's right up her alley.
Yeah, I think it's a factor of they price certain things, and then they
And then
find
they add
out
them up.
how much, and they do the math, and that's how it comes out,
So it's purely math.
pretty much.
Okay. So I'm ready to make a motion to approve the change order increase in the amount of $227,158.80 for the airport extension grading phase 2 project consisting of the runway 9 approach for the surface obstruction clearing.
Support. Commissioner Sterling seconds. Any further discussion? Any opposition? All in favor? Okay, who wants to adjourn? Commissioner Gamble? We are adjourned.